George Kirkpatrick, inspiration for the nation. The world is reeling on the death of Associate Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who died at the age of 87. The notorious RBG, as she became known to millions of generations of new fans, for her staunch positions defending the rights of all, but particularly women, in a long judicial career. And so joining me now to talk about that is Professor of Law at Syracuse University and the co-founder of the Cold Case Justice Initiative, Professor Paula Johnson. And Professor Johnson, welcome and thank you, and let me call you Paula, because that's how we roll. But first of all, what did you feel when you first heard of the passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg?
Well, first of all, hello, George, and we do roll like that. So hello, George, and I'm pleased to join you this afternoon, and always welcome the opportunity to to talk to you and the listeners. I felt a sense of deep grief actually when I first heard about Justice Ginsburg's passing. It's one of those events in life when you remember exactly where you were, and I can recall having happened just a day ago. I was actually watching television. I was watching Joy Reid's show, and I was watching that program, and all of a sudden Joy Reid kind of flustered, frankly.
Really?
Said, "Wait a minute, I'm getting a message," and then and we've got to interrupt this broadcast. And I'll tell you, when I heard her speak like that, something instinctively in me thought that it was the passing of Justice Ginsburg. And true enough, that was the emergency, broadcast that happened. Something just made me, sense that was the case. And so I just felt something in the pit of my stomach, when I heard that deep sadness, and on so many levels. Some of it was personal. Certainly I'm in the legal profession, and so it was professional as well. But I felt that this was a loss for the nation. And I thought that it was, something that reverberated really globally as well. I mean, her reach was global in terms of the impact that her life had on people.
Yeah, so let's talk about the impact that she had and what she means or meant, because a lot of, quite frankly, many of us was on the fear that we have has been realized, right? We wanted her to hold on until the election, at least, so that in our dreams, my dream, if you will, this president would not have the opportunity to appoint a new justice, or at least, and we're now getting some cracks in the armor, but that's a whole nother story. Let's talk about the legacy of RBG and what she meant. So as a professor of law, what did she mean to you?
Well, to me, she was someone who ascended to the Supreme Court, so this is the highest court in the land, who remained true to her sense of the importance of fairness within our system of government, including, of course, the courts. So she was an appellate court before that. She was an advocate, an attorney before that. And she carried that experience with her up to the Supreme Court, where she never forgot about the people who needed the court the most. And those were the folks who were usually excluded in all of the systems and institutions within our society. And so for me as an attorney, and as someone who teaches law as well, what I appreciated about her was that she tried to breathe life into the meaning of the words equal justice under law. It really is something really is something, special in the life of, any citizen, really. But for those of us who, have the privilege and opportunity to practice law, it does mean something to go to some of these, places, like the Supreme Court. And I've been inside of the Supreme Court. I've been a part of, litigation at the Supreme Court. And just to be in that space when you spend so much of your time like reading cases on the page, but to go inside of that very, august space, it's supposed to be like a temple of justice, if you will. And to stand in that space and to go and hear, the oral arguments and see those justices, that is really something that is so remarkable, to witness and be a part of. And I've had the opportunity to do that. So all of those things, I mean, she lifted the words off of the page and gave them meaning in our lives. And I thought that that was something that few justices have had the ability to do. The cases can be complicated for sure, but to be able to make it understandable, to make it relatable to every citizen, every person who needs to know what the court means and what those opinions mean to them, I think was a particular skill and sensitivity that Justice Ginsburg had.
Yeah, we're talking with Professor Paula Johnson, professor at law at Syracuse University, co-founder of the Cold Case Justice Initiative, and give you a second to speak about that as well if you want. One of the things that I'm learning about Justice Ginsburg is that there's two things that strike me. One is how universally, and I'm talking about Black folk and white folk and people from all walks of life, are coalescing around her. And I find that striking, quite frankly, because her advocacy particularly was making sure that women had equal protection of the law, but used the Constitution as a way to guarantee equal protection for everybody. The second thing I learned is that when she first started, she wasn't quite the liberal icon that she is today, right? She was more of a centrist, if you will, trying to go along to get along. And then the third thing I learned, probably all this you already knew, that she actually fought for the equal protection of men's rights as a basis of gender equality. I'm not saying that right. You'll fix it up for me, Professor Johnson, but she used the idea of advocating for men as a way to get equal protection for women, using the fact that at that time there were 9 Supreme Court justices at the time that she was arguing as a lawyer to win slowly rights for women. So those are 3 things that I learned recently. And so your thoughts about those 3 things?
Yeah, so let me suggest this. I mean, I understand your point. And what I would say about that is that, we have to keep this in a certain context and perspective, because the line and continuum as to what is considered conservative or, liberal or radical can change based on the times. And so something that we may view in contemporary times as more, centrist might have been at the one end of that spectrum, because during that particular era, things were such that this was, a very radical idea.
Right.
And so, these things can change depending on the times, who's considered to be centrist or, whatever position, they may hold. And so, I think we have to consider that at the time that she, became, a member of the court, there had only been one woman, who preceded her on the court, and that was Sandra Day O'Connor. And so it still was very much a male bastion that she joined when she became only the second woman to be on the court. She was once asked, when she would be happy with the composition of like how many women there should be on the court. And she said she'd be happy when there were 9, meaning that for generations, there had always been 9 men on the court. And until Justice Thurgood Marshall became a member of the court, all of those 9 men were white.
Right.
And so, that had been a very slow moving institution, one that had so much impact on all of our lives, was so unreflective of the diversity in the society. And so, yes, I mean, I would say, just going back to that idea, that these changes were quite monumental at the time when you consider, where we started.
Mm-hmm. Now,
On the other point that you raised, if I could, you talked about, you mentioned, for instance, the cases that she would bring, in which the plaintiffs in those cases, this is, as an advocate, the plaintiffs in those cases would be men. But let's understand the context again in which the complaints arose. These were men who were taking care of, in one instance, a mother. In another instance, his spouse, his wife, had passed away, but the men were not getting the benefits, spousal benefits, that they should have gotten when they're from the deceased spouse,
right.
or they weren't getting the kind of social benefits that they should have gotten for taking care of a sick mother. And so, had those men been women in those positions, they would have gotten those benefits. But that's a very gender stereotypical view.
Right.
And that's what Justice Ginsburg recognized, that the benefits should have gone to anyone in that position. It shouldn't have been because women were perceived to be the proper people to take on those caretaking roles, but because someone was in that role doing that service, helping out family members. And so whoever they were, irrespective of gender, they should have gotten those benefits. And so in that way, it supported women because, in a somewhat, paradoxical way, it benefited men. But it made the point that women have long been denied benefits, equal benefits. And in that case, it made the point by showing that men were being denied benefits because of a gendered stereotypical view.
Yeah, it's very, as I'm listening to you, and you're breaking it down for us, a lot of people compare the impact that she had on the court and the nation is similar to the impact that Thurgood Marshall had on the court and the nation. And your thoughts about that? And obviously, she stands on her own merits, no question about that. But the seeing her in the same light, fair comparison. Is it a fair comparison?
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely fair, very apt comparison. And that is, as I say, just to the average person, right? Just to the average person, ask them, how many Supreme Court justices they could name. And, I've been reflecting on this since she has passed away. And of course, my thoughts have run to Justice Marshall as well. Someone, again, for me, who, was a legal giant and someone whom I, admired and respected, in so many ways. And Justice Ginsburg, is of that order, because, she is not just someone whose name is mentioned in some sort of abstract, even historical sort of way. She is people that the nation recognize. I was so touched. I was so touched to watch, what was going on in Washington, D.C. as people just spontaneously started to go to the Supreme Court, because it's one of those events, right? It's one of those things that touches you so deeply, and you want to do something to show your grief, You want to show something, you want to show your appreciation, and you want to gather with people. And it seems so fitting to me that people would go to the Supreme Court and be there and say, this woman made an impact on all of us, no matter where we stood. And she made an impact on the entire nation. She put those principles to the task, whether or not she was doing it as someone who argued cases in the Supreme Court herself, whether she was someone who wrote opinions when she was in the majority of the decision, or whether she wrote very strongly worded dissenting opinions. People knew that she was standing on principle, and those principles had to do with equality. And the reason why I think people know her name, as well as the name of Justice Thurgood Marshall, is because these are justices who are associated with opening up the society.
Yes.
They are the people, because of their own backgrounds, because they walked in this world experiencing the kinds of discrimination, the kinds of closed doors, the kinds of rejection that so many others of us have felt. And they took that knowledge, they took that experience with them to the bench. And people saw them doing that work in opening things up. And I think that that is why people remembered and revered them so much, where no one else was talking about the importance of Black lives as it related to opinions coming down from the Supreme Court. Thurgood Marshall was able to say that. There hadn't been another justice on the U.S. Supreme Court who had ever represented someone who had been on death row. Black defendants on death row. Thurgood Marshall could say that. He had done that. And so he knew how unjust our criminal justice system was. He brought that. No one else on the Supreme Court prior to Thurgood Marshall had been denied the right to vote, or who had represented people who had been denied the right to vote on the basis of race. Thurgood Marshall had represented those folks. He knew that that was what was going on in our nation, and he brought that knowledge, that experience to his position on the Supreme Court. Similarly, Justice Ginsburg. I mean, think about this, George. Justice Ginsburg went to Harvard Law School and then transferred to Columbia Law School because of her husband's position, right? So they moved back to New York. She graduated at the top of her class, and I've been listening to so many of her interviews and, so much of the coverage. But she describes that experience, having graduated at the very top of her class. And she said not a single New York law firm was bidding for her to join them. That is just unprecedented. It means that of all of those heralded law firms in New York City, where typically, when someone's, top 5, top 10, even top 25% of their class, right? They are banging on the door for those graduates to come into their law firms. This woman, and frankly, by the way, the same thing happened with Sandra Day O'Connor in Arizona. She was a Stanford Law graduate. None of the law firms sought her out, graduated, top of her class. None of those law firms sought her out to be an attorney in their law firms. They asked them to do other things, maybe to be, law clerks, or something that wasn't commensurate with their knowledge and their ability. She spoke, Justice Ginsburg, about being a Jewish woman. She spoke about being a woman who was a mother with a young child at the time that she was graduating from law school. All of those things were seen not as attributes, but as impediments to doing work on the court. So she had that. I mean, these are things that you do not forget. And she knew that there were others who were experiencing if not the very same types of exclusions, analogous types of exclusions. And so she saw that there was something that needed to be corrected within our judicial system, our social systems, and institutional systems.
We're talking Paula Johnson, of course, professor of law at Syracuse University, and we're reflecting on the passing of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, notorious RBG. One of the things that also has come up is her strong friendship with the late Justice Antonin Scalia, and the real friend, like a real friendship that they had, even though, and real respect that they have for one another, even though they were often on the other side of decisions. And I only bring that up to say that in terms of civility, have we lost the ability, Professor Johnson, to agreeably disagree in this climate? And what does that also say about her? Because I know that she often talked in some of these interviews about how her mother told her not to be emotional. And I mean that, and this is what she said her mother told her not to be, and very deliberate in terms of, and paced herself. But the other thing that I also learned is that she was she would work, you were not going to outwork her, right? You weren't going to do it because it was just part of her, who she was. But this idea of having a really, really good friend who is totally opposite you politically. They enjoyed opera. They even made an opera about them. So talk to me, or reflect. What about that?
Yes.
What can we say about what kind of person she was, but also about, is this possible now in this very polarized and climate? Like, could you see yourself doing that, right?
Well, I like to think that I'm able to have, in some cases, diametrically opposed positions from, other people, from some people,
Right.
and still be able to operate in a respectful and collegial way. And I think that it is a characteristic that is diminishing rapidly across our society. And it could be that what we are seeing is too much of the opposite. We're seeing too much of the ways in which people are treating each other in such ungenerous and inhumane and angry ways. And that can have a way of perpetuating itself when it isn't, something that we, find needs to be addressed and stopped, frankly. The political discourse, in the society is just so riven. And I would say in some instances it's very craven. That there's no indication of humanity in it. And I can recall, for instance, some of the politicians talking about, others as enemies, and having to be corrected. We don't have enemies who are running for positions in our society. We have political opponents, but that is such an incendiary word to call someone who may be taking a different political view from you as an enemy. We really need to get away from that in order for us to be able to have the discussions and come to reach the solutions that we need to have about very pressing issues in our society. So, Justice Ginsburg and Justice Scalia, had a model for how people who could be very, very different in their views could nevertheless find some place where there was commonality, common interest, common understanding. And so, that would be something that we might want to really spend time reflecting on as well, because I think that our society is in dire need of more civility. And I want to be clear, when I'm talking about civility, I am not saying to not have opposite points of view. I'm saying let's be able to do that in a way that doesn't deny the humanity of the other person. And I'm seeing less and less of that across the political institutions in our society. And I think that that filters down and filters out into the society in general. And so what we need, the leaders in our society would be, better serve us by modeling behavior that lets us get to the issues that need to be addressed without demonizing others who hold different points of view. We have serious, serious issues to address in every location in our society, not the least of which, of course, is the court system. And we have got to find a way for us to be able to address those issues in a way that is much less polarizing and in a way that carries with it some mutual respect on both sides of the issue. As I always like to say, there is a responsibility for the person who is speaking, and there is a responsibility for the person who is listening to make sure that you aren't, speaking out of turn, and that you aren't misconstruing something in a way that, suggests that that is not what that speaker intended. So we have a lot of work to do just in the discourse and the way in which we have discourse to address the real serious problems that we have in this society. I just heard a statistic today. I mean, if we're keeping up with the COVID-19 incidents, 200,000 people in the United States. Right. Just in the United States, right, in this pandemic. We are not dealing with that in a level and in a way that has brought our society to a place of consensus, mutual concern. The federal government hasn't been, as helpful as they need to be for states and localities in addressing these issues. And as you know, our communities are suffering disproportionately from the impact of COVID-19 and those related issues, from the illnesses themselves, from the economic impact of them, what it's doing to families. All of these things are serious issues that as a community, and I mean as a national community, we need to be addressing.
Wow, Professor Paula Johnson, Professor of Law at Syracuse University. Is there anything more that you wanted to say about the legacy of Justice RBG?
Well, it's really, hard to, put it into, such a distilled way. But I will share this with you. Yeah. Her legacy is going to be long and deep. Mm-hmm. I think that people are going to appreciate her even more fully, mm-hmm, as with her passing, because it's going to send people to read, her opinions again or anew for people who hadn't read them before. And deep, because I think she reached down, mm-hmm, as well as up to every level of our society for people who needed the fairness and the meaning of the words of the Constitution. What is important to me, George, is that people know that in this election year, and we have an election now just less than, it's about 43 or so days away. I mean, that's a very short time. Mm-hmm. but people need to appreciate the importance of the courts in our lives. And that is something that I think her passing might also help people to to understand, in a deeper sort of way. And so why? I mean, I come back to this.
Hmm.
Why voting is absolutely imperative. We can see now that this debate that is happening, right?
Right.
We can see this debate that is happening about, who will be her replacement, and how that decision, is going to be determined is based on the role that the Congress has, in making that decision. One, the role of the executive, the president, in naming a nominee, and then the role of the Senate in holding confirmation hearings and voting to confirm or not that nominee. Now, because the Senate is currently, in majority Republican hands, that means that there is, very little that the Democrats in the Senate can do to stop something, that the Republicans would want to do. Now, we think, and I'm of this view, that there is something quite uh, wrongful, and even unseemly in wanting to put a Supreme Court justice in place before the November 3rd election, and even, I would say, before the inauguration of whoever the president is going to be
Right.
in January. I simply think that the timing and the circumstances of that are wrong. And one of the things that disturbed me, very much, just as Justice Ginsburg had passed away, I mean, there was scarcely a moment when people were, taking the moment, taking the time, to give tributes to her.
Right.
When the political discussion began to overtake any sense of appreciation and mourning. And I live in the real world. I know that there are political realities to that, but
Right.
it hadn't even been 24 hours
It
before
may
there
not
was
have been
talk
two
about who
hours.
her replacement would be.
It might. It
Yes,
might.
well, exactly.
Right. And I gotta admit,
So this is what
yeah, I probably jumped into that too, thinking, "Oh my God, what does this mean?" I mean, so yeah, guilty
yeah.
as charged, right?
Well, so yes, like I said, you're right. To some degree, it's unavoidable
Yeah.
because, we are in this very intense political moment. I mean, we have a
Yeah.
presidential election, but we also have as we say, the down ballot,
Right.
elections, going on as well. Congressional and state and local and so forth. So I'm not saying that it is something that we should not consider at all, but
Right.
it
Right.
seemed to me that there should at least have been some amount of
Take a
time
breath, right?
where people focused on the life of this woman, who was so great. And so I bring up all of that to say people need to understand, people in our communities, people across the nation need to understand the significance of appointing Supreme Court justices and who sits on that court. There will be critical decisions coming up, in the next term of the Supreme Court, which begins, just next week, in October, the first
Correct.
Monday of October, right?
Yes.
You've got the, Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, that is on the docket for the Supreme Court. You have important criminal justice, issues coming before the Supreme Court. I mean, these are issues that will affect our lives in so many ways. And so, who gets to make those decisions? Are, in terms of appointing the members of the court, are about who is voted in to the Senate and in the House of Representatives. So voting on every single level, local, state, national, are very important for aspects of our lives, even if we don't seem to think so on a daily basis. But we will feel those reverberations from those decisions.
And you spoke about the down ballot races. Let's talk about. We don't. I don't want to talk about, but just to reflect. The Senate Majority Leader is in a race. Lindsey Graham is in a race in his home state, and also,
Yeah.
uh, and so if those individuals are people that in those places you want to see some change, then you know what you got to do. Paul, I did say you could spend a minute to talk about Cold Case Justice Initiative. You can either do that, or we can come back and do it another time, whatever works for you.
Mhm. Well, thank you so much for that. And just greatly appreciate your support for the work we do at CCJI, the Cold Case Justice Initiative. We are continuing to look into those, cases. We also do research, George, on issues having to do with racially motivated killings and how they are connected not only to the early eras, such as the civil rights era, but how those, issues and incidents are connected to the present. And so, doing the kind of necessary analysis and connections in terms of what is required, to be done in our society. And so, we appreciate, the support for that. If anyone wants to support our work, please go to the law school's website. Folks can support us, with funding. They can, because there are ways in which people can, do that online at the law school. They'll, find the, portal for supporting the Cold Case Justice Initiative. But to be aware that, as I always say, the past is not past. These cases like George Floyd, like Breonna Taylor, all of these cases, and just, up the road in Rochester, but for the fact that we now have this, these devices where we can see what happened on, cell phone cameras, those cases would not have come to our attention either. They would be the cold cases of
Right.
another era. And so we have got to make sure that everybody gets justice, not just, what is happening that we can see, but also the cases where families are still awaiting justice for things that have happened, some decades ago. And so even where we cannot bring people before, to be prosecuted, we are going to investigate those cases so that families and our societies will have the information and knowledge that they need to have about what has happened there, and so that the historical record, if nothing else, the historical record is going to be corrected about those events and those killings.
Paula Johnson is a professor of law at Syracuse University, talking today about the Cold Case Justice Initiative, but also remembering the life of Associate Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the legacy that she had for looking out for all of us in this country. And I'm sure there will be books written about her. And you suggested reading at her opinions, which is what a lot of people have said have really turned this generation on, her dissenting opinions, if you will, and how, in her words, measured as they were, really shown a light, as you suggest, in plain language about the impact of not protecting all of us. So, and I just want to thank you for your work too, because they're going to write about you one day. And the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much, George.
I just appreciate your commitment.
Thank you for that. That's high praise. Thank you, George. I appreciate it.
And we should say to people that you're also part of a committee doing a community book read, Just Mercy. It happens every Monday night from 6 to 7:30, which is also about the legal system and the unjust ways in which people of color, African-American males in particular, are treated every Monday from 6 to 7:30. There's still time for you to join. If you didn't read chapter 1 and 2 yet, that's fine, because it's 3 and 4 this week. Come where you are and answer those questions. And you can, where can they find information about the Just Mercy Community Book Read?
And perhaps you have it on your website, but it's the Onondaga County Bar Association's website, and there is a link there where people can register. So we do need for people to register in order to participate. And so go to the OCBA website. That's the Onondaga County Bar Association, and there's a link for registration. And also, if people need books, we also have copies of books. People can pick them up from the public library downtown, or from the OCBA's offices. And so just contact us about that. And, people can, we can make sure that people get a book in their hands.
That's right. All right. Thank you very much, Paula Johnson. Paula is the professor of law at Syracuse, co-founder, co-director of the Cold Case Justice Initiative, and doing all kinds of work in the community. So glad to talk to you, Professor Johnson. George Kilpatrick, Inspiration for the Nation.